Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Whole thing, dude.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real.
Non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
Bob, always a pleasure to see you. How's things been?
Oh, I've been very, very busy, as you can imagine. I'm getting ready for my first formal meeting with Skywatcher coming up in the next 2 weeks. I have interesting outside possible activity on UAP physics and UAP materials. So I'm just been busy.
That's great to hear. Now, I think you mentioned previously on X about you're going to be working with Skywatch. Can you just go into a little bit more detail for anyone that may not be familiar how that?
Yeah, so Skywatcher it's roughly divided into gather a ton of observational science data and analyze all of that data and draw conclusions or make hypotheses. And so I was recruited for the UAP advisory board, which means, and the things they've said to me say they want me to provide ongoing input and critique of what they're currently doing or have done, and then later add to the analysis of what they've found. And so it seems that my role is flexible, but it's not yet been formalized. But I'm meeting with the leadership in the next 2 weeks, so it's something, and it's just interesting. As you can watch on X and elsewhere, there is controversy surrounding them, but it's the usual suspects raising the controversy. So I'm going to judge them by their behavior and character. And so far, I've seen nothing that warrants me being worried. I think people understand where I'm coming from, that I am interested in data that the public has been denied being given to them. And so far, that seems to be their principal focus.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I've been saying for a while now, they're covering all angles. They're doing the science, they're getting the data, which I hope to see released, whether publicly or at least for scientific analysis outside of their organization. But then on the other hand, they're also giving us these glossy videos, which the public, it's been screaming for. We want to see people out in the field doing the work. So we're getting a bit of everything. So I think it's also too early to start judging anybody. These things take time. They've got to put the work in. They've got this great team. I love how they're covering the real technical scientific angle, but then they've got this psionics team on the other side. So they're mixing a bit of everything. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. And it's Gary Nolan's role, especially here in the beginning, seems to be, let me help you assure your data will be useful to people that want to do science. And this has couple of different aspects. I'm sure they're completely obvious. Some of them are not so obvious. If you want science to be done with your data, wow, they have to be completely transparent. They have to tell how their equipment worked, what the specifications of the equipment is, or another scientist can't independently verify what they've collected. And I'm sure there's all sorts of internal goings on about this. And it's got to be in conflict in some way with the fact that they have external investors that probably want something. I don't know the details of that at all. I have zero visibility into that, but that is a question I have. If they want to do science with their data, how they're going to juggle that.
Yeah. It's interesting because they've mentioned this dog whistle, which they say attracts these UAP quite frequently. Yet they have said this is their proprietary technology, and they're not going to release it at this time. So it's not fully transparent. But let's hope further down the line that they do. I'd hope so.
Okay, so I view those as two separate things. Let me tell you how I'm slicing it. Irrespective of how they get the things to come, the data is still valuable that they came and gathered data on it. So they may decide not to reveal the dog whistle, fearing it will be used by bad actors or inappropriately, but also get data for scientists to look at that are strictly limited to the behavior and performance of the things they're capturing. So look, this is clearly stuff that's going to have to be ironed out over the long term. I'm sure they're thinking about it now because they're getting pushback from all over and interaction all over, and other scientists want to look at their data, and they have to figure out how to make this work. Otherwise, it's just more anecdotes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've had enough of those over the years, that's for sure. So, yeah, hopefully this time it is something different. But, I have faith in them. I think what I've seen so far looks great. So with your role, do you think you'll get out in the field with them at all?
I believe that is the goal. But again, people have to realize they've got a finite budget. And during the most recent interview with Jesse Michaels, they hint a bit about the costliness of bringing people into the costly nature of bringing people into the field. So there's a bit of juggling. I'm sure that, I care zero about making money off them. I don't want a salary or anything like that. But I'm like everyone else. I don't want to spend my vacation money doing work on, so I want them to cover my expenses. So all of this adds up and is expensive. And I'm sure that people are motivated by different things. I literally don't need a salary, but I don't want to pay expenses.
That makes sense completely. So, will you get to see that historical data as well? Because, they've been gathering data for some years now, apparently.
And but again, we have to concern ourselves with the value of the early data. Have they always done the data where they maintain absolute data integrity, provenance, etc., for the entirety of the 4.5 years? Or did they go through a multi-year, this is interesting anecdotal evidence, let's take a look at it for a while, and then figure out what we need to do to gather valuable scientific evidence? And they only done the psionics in the last year. They mentioned dog whistle, but they also, in the Jesse Michaels interview, talk about the psionics is late to the game. And they've got to have hundreds of people that want to help. How can they even figure out how to vet them?
No, that's a really good point. I mean, we've yet to learn that much about the psionics team. I believe they're going to reveal that in their next video on YouTube, which I think is probably coming fairly soon. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to that hardcore science, and then you're bringing in something like psionics, which, for all I've seen historically, it's almost been, you've had like kind of the nuts and bolts on one side and the woo on the other. And this is the first time we're seeing this real combination in such an organization.
It'll be hard for them to do science based on measurements of the psionics team. So again, whatever means, they're bringing something in and making observations on these physical attributes when it's in their presence. So again, how you get a fruit fly to fly in your jar is independent from doing the genetic structure on the fruit fly. Okay, so again, they got an attractor, but what they care about is, I think, other data. And so, because it'll be very hard for me to figure out how they're going to be doing independently verifiable scientific data on the actions of the psionics team and their outcomes. What repeatable, predictable thing can they do? And so that'll be an issue.
Yeah, well, what's the most exciting thing? What are you looking forward to the most?
Oh my goodness. I want to see all the stuff with my own two eyes. Who wouldn't? I mean, come on, we're all curious. But again, can I see something in what they're doing that I can advise them would help them do other things? And I've already done some of that, and their response has been very positive. And so I don't want to say exactly all that is now, because I don't know yet what they want to do with any of that, if anything. And I don't want to make them feel trapped by me talking about my private advice to them, because it might interfere with something they have ongoing.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. It'd be exciting to see your journey progress with them, and I'm sure they'll let you know what you can and can't talk about at certain stages throughout your work with them. So no, that's really
Well, let me say something to that. They have not told me not to talk. What they have said is, if you're going to speak of Skywatcher, please tell us in advance so we can prepare for it. So far, they've not put a muzzle on me.
I'm sure they won't need to. I and I'm sure you'll have nothing but good things to say.
Yeah, I really want to help them and not get in their way.
Yeah, of course. It's exciting. We're coming up to 6 months since Jake Barber stepped forward and we first learned of Skywatcher. So, we've seen the initial stages of them sort of setting up for this public-facing organization. So I'm excited to see what comes of it. Really, I really am. I have a lot of faith in them, and it's great to see something separated from the government side of things, because there's been a lot of weight put on that in the past few years, and that doesn't seem to be moving along quite as smoothly as maybe we'd like to. Like, what are your thoughts now when you look at, we were meant to have a hearing a few weeks ago that didn't materialize. There are meetings happening and briefings. So where are you at? Where's your headspace at when it comes to the government aspect of disclosure?
Okay, so I heard very, very positive things coming from people that were involved with the UAP Disclosure Fund's scientific panel, in which there was one scientist and 4 representatives. Yeah, Eric Davis was the only scientist. He was the only scientist.
Avi Loeb, surely.
Okay, I'm sorry. Avi Loeb is a scientist along with Eric, but I call Eric a UFO scientist. Avi Loeb. Okay, Avi Loeb is right now, in my estimation, a science manager. In a sense, he has a very large scientific team he's trying to get funding for, and he's asking for $1 billion of taxpayer money, or whatever he can get, in order to do his observational platforms. So this is big science, not small science. And Eric Davis is the one who's been around the longest doing UAP science. So in addition to that, Burleson and others went and met with Grush and Arrow and the FBI folks that have been doing investigation into the UAP phenomenon. And apparently they learned more from the FBI than they have in multiple years of Arrow's existence. I mean, that was pretty much a flat statement. And so that's pretty amazing. That's going on. So that's number one. Number two, the third thing that really kind of got my juices flowing was, this is not me promoting, but I think people know, Ross Coulthart's multi-part series into investigations into Arizona gave us some spectacular things, including Melinda Leslie and Jerome and others, observational evidence of there being a deep underground military base where anomalous craft in cooperation with U.S.-style military craft going in and out of a place where there's nothing there, so they have to be coming from underground. And that was really interesting. I just think it's going to be very, very interesting to follow all of that to see where it goes, because there was a lot there and a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I mean, even though it's been quiet on the public front, it does seem like we've had quite a bit happening, outside of the public view. But, let's stick with Eric Davis there in that science panel UAP Disclosure Fund event. He was talking openly about different types of beings. Did that surprise you at all, or what was your reaction when you heard?
It surprised me he said it. So I'm sure you're aware that by now, given my public stance, that I hit to hear a lot of stuff and see a lot of stuff. I mean, you do in your stance. I mean, we get told a lot of stuff and shown a lot of stuff. And it's a nonstop amongst these groups that there are multiple species, and they don't call them ultra-terrestrials. In these private groups, they call them extraterrestrials from other star systems. They literally don't pull a punch in private about what these things are. And so that's all very interesting, especially since he named them and described them and talked to them about as matter-of-factly as he could, especially to Representative Burleson, who was asking the question, and Davis just openly answered him. And Burleson didn't even flinch.
Yeah, it's pretty eye-opening. And we know that since that event, which was May 1st, I think it probably about a week, 10 days afterwards, I think Eric Davis was in a skiff with Burleson and I'm not sure who else. So hopefully he was able to expand on that information and give them something to work with, because I think at the end of the day, we need these members of the UAP Caucus to actually start using this information they're getting to try and...
I have zero belief in their ability. They don't have an investigative arm. They don't have arrest power. I mean, they can issue a subpoena and try to get the House Sergeant at Arms to go get them. But do you really think they will, since that's never been done since the Civil War? So I don't hold out much hope for them. They can make a lot of noise and do a lot of publicity stuff and get people to testify under oath to try to convince others that they should be doing stuff. And we'll just have to see. I don't think they have enough clout to break it all out in the open on their own. Working with others, they certainly do.
Well, who others though? Who do you think they really need? Do you think they need Gang of Eight, executive branch? Like, how would this be done better?
There's the executive branch and the office of the President of the United States are our only sure ways.
Right. It's going to be tough to get it to happen, though.
Very tough.
What else do you think we could do, or where else would she be? Where else would she? Let me say that again. Where should we be looking elsewhere? Because, like I said, I think we've been resting all our eggs in this one basket over the government the last few years for disclosure, and it just hasn't been going to plan. We mentioned Skywatch. Where else do you see positive progression?
I think we're going to see from multiple different vectors, external groups providing data gathering equipment that will gather evidence independent of government. I'll give you an example. MADAR has been around like forever. It's been around for two or three decades. And it involves radiation detectors, magnetic anomaly detectors. And in my own personal collection, I have had visual events that look like blurry videos, but they're correlated with all this other data that shows it's anomalous. And so, so long as we think about what is the minimal we can do to gather enough data to show these anomalies are actually anomalous and they're real, that's where we should concentrate, because we're not going to get billion-dollar outlays. We need $1,000 outlays to show us that something is real. I mean, we are all convinced based on crappy, blurry videos for the last 70 years. All we need to do is add sufficient extra data showing that something is anomalous to get people to pay attention. So imagine Mick West never being able to debunk a blurry video because you have all this other data showing it's anomalous. Okay, so that's where we ought to focus. And so you've got Madar and Mupas, was Jim Segala's Mupas, gathering this data, and you have Sky 360.org in Europe with a system to gather videos married with ambient data, and just things like that. So and then you've got the two brothers from Long Island who are now involved with the UAP Disclosure Fund and others that are going to work on providing, again, that's fairly high end for a private effort because that was hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. I don't think they actually had to spend that much, but it's close. So in other words, there's a lot of stuff going on that does not involve government. We want to be independent of government to the extent possible.
I mean, let's talk about smoking gun evidence. And I know data to back up these blurry videos and that would or could be considered smoking gun if all of it kind of aligns. But what about these high definition videos that we're led to believe exist within, things like JWICS and SIPRNet? Why can't we, the general public, or these organizations seem to get these high fidelity images or videos?
Because they reveal details about the operational capabilities of our sensors, and that is never going to come out.
But no, what I'm saying is, why can't someone like the Tedesco brothers or these outside organizations, why have we not seen any HD stuff from them?
Okay. So I think the military systems and the government systems have been attracting attractive to the UAP, and they're getting close. And automation, it's automation. It's lack of automation. In other words, we need private data where the collection is automated. And once we get to automated, artificial intelligence enabled data gathering, we will get that spectacular data. And again, the cost of the artificial intelligence embedded microcontroller is now down around to $200 or $300. So NVIDIA embedded control systems doing machine learning inference is already available. People just haven't organized and put it out. It's there. We need to organize and put it out.
I think one thing that I'm struggling with a little bit, maybe not struggling, it's probably not the right word, but just quickly mentioning Skywatcher again, they gave us this taxonomy of 9 different shapes of UAP that they're seeing regularly. And a lot of them were shapes we'd barely even heard of before when it comes to UAP. It wasn't your stereotypical discs and triangles, etc. It seems like the patterns that we may have thought we were getting when it comes to UAP sightings have just disappeared, and it's just everything all over the place, and there's no kind of pattern to this. It feels like we're almost getting further away from understanding things. How do you see that?
I think we have a tendency to think it's a monolithic entity visiting us when the evidence shows that it's a plethora of things visiting us. And it's not just one thing. I think, and we're fooling ourselves if we try to view it as one thing. I don't think it is. I think the evidence shows it's not just one thing.
I mean, that makes sense, and that is encouraging to hear. I just sometimes, I think and try and look at the bigger picture, and I think maybe we're just getting further and further away from understanding or beginning to sort of see what theories hold more weight than others. It's a really difficult subject to be in sometimes. It really is. But, we have a lot of voices as well in this subject, and it does seem to be quite a self-contained community. We're struggling to open the conversation up. How do you see the role of media at the moment? Because it seems like in 2023, when Grush stepped forward, it opened up to a new audience. I felt like we were finally breaking out of the stigma and everything, but it seems to, again, not being covered so much. Does that worry you at all?
I expected it because corporate media is going to bow to the pressure of, if you want defense or intelligence community briefings, you're not going to cover this or we're going to cut you off. So, I mean, it's just, it's clearly easily understood why they would bow to pressure. And apparently News Nation is the one and only independent entity that's widely viewed in the United States that's going to cover this. And they have made a star out of Ross Coulthart on their venue. And they've certainly empowered him. They have not gotten in his way.
Yeah, no, it's really encouraging to see Ross covering a lot of different cases all over the world. And I think he's got more to come in the near future from what I hear, which is really exciting. But, I'm not really that surprised that, legacy media isn't consistent with this subject. I just wish they were, but that's just wishful thinking, I suppose. But
I mean, look at, not to get political, but I'll give you an example. The President of the United States threatened to cut CBS off, and they bowed to his pressure and did other things which in the past would have gotten them ostracized by other media. And they're not the only one. I don't want to pick on them. I'm just telling you, he's specifically singled them out and is using them as an example of how he can put a boot on their neck and get them to behave. And again, we cannot afford not to have democracy, if we want to preserve it, has to have an independent free press. Otherwise, democracy fails.
I mean, it's great. Like you said, News Nation are doing wonderful work. And I think what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of online outlets as well that just seem, and independent journalists, we've got Christopher Sharp and people like that doing fantastic work. Do you think the intelligence community still has a hold over some kind of, legacy media from, historical days?
They won't bring them in and tell them things, and they won't be their sources of information if they run afoul of them. So they've got them under their thumb. The corporate media reporters are being ordered by corporate headquarters, don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Right. Yeah.
And it's understandable. It's completely understandable. They are there to serve their stockholders, not the public.
I mean, some of these stockholders could well be the gatekeepers of UAP as well, some kind of link to everything. Are we still really struggling with the gatekeepers? It felt like a couple of years ago we were starting to break through and people were stepping forward. They were sick of the old ways, let's say.
I think right now we are internally seeing a massive attempt to claw it back into a box. Well, I think it will fail, but the final determination is not yet here. You've got Matthew Brown and David Grush and Lou Elizondo and others coming out and talking. And it is amazing that they have not stomped all over them, except I think they're trying to find out other ways to do it. And they're going to attempt to claw it back into the box. They are. We just need to keep the pressure up until they crumble.
But what will it take? Because we get new whistleblowers, Matthew Brown being the latest. We had Jake Barber at the start of the year. We get a new whistleblower with great, compelling information, but then nothing seems to come of it. And then a few months later, we get another one. Like, what will it take to break that repetitive pattern until we actually get some progress made?
Matthew Brown to come out and say, okay, let's go with me. I'll take you to a place and show you a door behind which there's alien bodies and a craft. I mean, that level of action is going to be required.
Who would be able to do that? Because if the UAP Caucus and members of the House don't have that power, then how do we get to that stage?
I don't know the answer. I have to tell you, I don't know the answer. I mean, look, there are lots of things I know. Lots of things I know that I won't ever speak out loud because I took an oath not to. So long as you have people bound by those oaths, it's going to be hard to break through.
What's your view on things like the Invisible College, historically? Do you think things like that are still going on?
Yeah, I think they're called the working group now. I don't know all of them who are there, but I know that there's members of Congress, scientists, former people insiders, etc., that are in this working group, and I just don't know who all their identities are. But that to me is a type of invisible college. They have a spokesperson or two, and most people don't trust some of their spokespeople, but they're still there. And I know they're meeting. And so we have to see where it goes.
It's so difficult. It really is.
Well, it really is. It's just hard to figure out the next steps to take.
So every now and again, we get new people coming into the community who are experiencers. We have people coming in who are saying they're insiders. What do you recommend is the best way that people vet these individuals?
That's a very, very hard question. It's because we don't have any independent investigative agencies. We literally are a community that has to trust people's word. That's very, very hard. Vinny, I just don't know the answer other than we need to be skeptical of everyone until we have supporting evidence that says we can trust them.
Yeah.
I hate to sound like that, Vinny, but what other choice do we have? Because you know as well as I know, the UFO community is full of grifters. They're selling books, they're selling videos, they're trying to make a living off of telling other stories, and it can't only be about that.
No, that comes secondary to the subject. We've got to do the work first, and yeah, it's difficult. It really is. Do you mean, we know that the subject's been filled with misinformation and disinformation for decades. Do you think that's still coming thick and fast as, up to modern times?
Okay, well, so we had the blue avians and other things like that on Gaia, etc., and we all know about them. But some of the people we're listening to regularly in our X spaces are still on Gaia, talking to the same people, and they sound like they're authoritative, and I'm not judging them. I'm telling you, I have no basis for judging them other than I'm not going to trust my life to their credibility. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's very worrisome.
Just don't know any way around it. We have to figure out. We need to concentrate more on actual data gathering and less on armchair quarterbacking where we're curating what flows across our screens. You can't really do research watching YouTube video.
That is very true. And I say that a lot. You've got to do proper research, old documents, old cases. I mean, let's talk about old cases, because I found that now, I came from a background of researching before I did any of this, looking at a lot of old historical cases. Then I've moved into this sphere in the last few years. And now when I go back and look at historical cases, I get like a second wind and a lot more context to some of them. Do you find that? Do you know, or do you see any correlation?
I'm reading Leonard Stringfield from cover to cover. You get the idea. I'm going back and looking at all of that because with new eyes and new public stuff and new artificial intelligence help and so forth, we can sift this for finer grains than we could before. And now we have the huge amount of information at our fingertips. Now you look at the hold up for most people is in order to do very, very deep, detailed research on using these tools. It costs hundreds of dollars a month, and not everybody can do it.
Right.
And the Gemini 2.5 Pro is It's $200 a month.
Wow.
Yeah. And it will literally run a ring around everything else, but it's really costly. I think right now, probably just me personally looking at all of these things, right now, the kind of sweet spot is in Grok 3.0. That seems to be the sweet spot. It'll do both research and thinking, etc. And it's $50 a month rather than something ridiculous, which to some people would be ridiculous.
Sure. No, absolutely. So you feel like AI is now helping, because there's a lot of people like myself who I use ChatGPT and a few things, here and there, but I've certainly not dove fully deep into relying on it in any kind of research.
Trust it this much, but when I give it a prompt, I tell it, do not tell me anything for which you cannot present me a link to supporting evidence. You have to be cautious. Say, don't tell me anything you cannot support without evidence, in which case it's very helpful.
Yeah, because I have seen some people use answers that they've got through AI to back up their stories or the points that they're making. And a lot of what you see is a lot of coulds and maybes and might and if and things like that in these answers from these learning models. So I'm like, that is not an argument. You can't use that. I really struggle with it. So I have a little bit of I'm cautious with that kind of thing, but I do see it growing, I suppose. But I'm old school research. I come from
I like to do old school research, but I don't mind using it as a tool, so long as I go out and do the vetting. I'll give you an example. Recently, there's been a high-profile physicist, let's put it that way, that's been using Grok and other things to help support their theory. And I've already found fault in it. And saying what they're saying is non-scientific and can't be supported because it's wrong. And I just work around it. I think they're making a valuable contribution. They could make more valuable contribution if they checked every line of what they put out.
It muddies the waters still in some aspects, which is definitely not something we need at the moment.
Well, the part of it that bothers me, that really, really does bother me, is the people sound authoritative, and those who don't know as much or can't question it as much or don't feel comfortable questioning them because of their authoritative position, they are being harmed. And that really bothers me.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a few individuals and cases, let's say, that are still perpetuating, they're just thrown around this community on a daily basis, that it worries me when people latch onto things because, like you said, someone sounds authoritative or they make a point which makes sense. But, I think what we're dealing with, sense doesn't always come into it because this is so much bigger and grander than anything else that, that we're dealing with in this world right now. It's
if you cannot go into a public questioning and forum and answer, I don't know, I don't have the answer, you're being disingenuous at best and a liar at worst. You just can't do that. You got to say, to the best of my knowledge, here's what I know. Further than that, I cannot go.
No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. People say things as if they're, the God's truth, even though it's a theory still, or it's their hypothesis or their opinion, and they don't caveat it a lot of the time. And I really struggle with that. It really muddies the waters for me, and I hate seeing it sometimes where people just latch onto it.
Okay, let me put it to you this way. I want to give an illustrative example. What U.S. entity has been focused on by ufology to the total neglect of all other possible institutions that they're suspicious of having something to do with the UFO cover-up? What U.S. institution?
I mean, the CIA?
Yes, and they're not even the one we should be looking at. It's just, they're involved, but they are not the source of most of the information.
Would you think the Air Force is then?
No.
Where do you think then?
I think we have not looked enough at the FBI, the Department of Energy, now the Department of Homeland Security, and some other things that we are just neglecting. And from almost the get-go, the entity in our government that has been more involved with UFOs than any other is the United States Navy. And there's just been, nobody looks at them. Everybody wants to scream about the Air Force and the CIA. And the Navy has been involved deeply since the get-go.
That's true. It is. Historically, very much so.
And they have a lot involved. Their assets are constantly being assaulted by these USOs.
Yeah.
I tell you, I had a conversation with Tim Gallaudet. And I said, Tim, here is my personal impression. If the Navy sends out a blue water asset and it stays out for more than a little while outside of the territorial waters, they will have an anomalous experience with probability 1. And he agreed.
Wow.
He agreed with that statement.
I mean, that's amazing. And the USO conversation is red hot, and it has been for the last few years, but it didn't seem to be that way decades ago. You know, it was the whole UFO, it was flying objects. Why do you think now we're hearing so much more about this underwater activity?
Because I think there's a lot of hiding of stuff we should be looking at underwater. It's natural. 3/4 of the earth is basically unknown to humanity. It's the best place to hide anything. And I think the Navy has seen lots of stuff. They've had, there's a Navy pilot that had a collision with a UFO.
And this was recently, wasn't it?
Recently. And these humongous craft that fly out of the water and are bigger than a carrier, you think they don't find that threatening? Of course they do. And I think they're sick of not being looked into, because that means their assets and their personnel are at risk.
Yeah. And you've experienced this firsthand, right? When you were serving?
On both the USS Hampton and the USS Blue Ridge, we had anomalous activity.
Did you witness anything yourself, or was it a like radar?
No, in both cases, I heard the USO on the Hampton, and I saw glowing lights above the ship in a typhoon on the Blue Ridge, because I noticed the rain was no longer hitting the ship, and looked up and I saw these lights, and it was blocking off. I couldn't make out the superstructure, and all of a sudden it glowed brighter and took off, and the rain came back. It was bigger than the ship. It was bigger than the ship.
What do you think? So, do you have a working theory on why the UAP themselves are so interested in water?
It hides them. It's hide them for whatever
Simply
reason.
for hiding, not for fuel or for the hydrogen in the water.
Oh, I'm sure there's resources and fuel and all sorts of reasons, but mostly it protects them from us and our inquisitive nature. It's just the best place for them to hide.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It really is, and it really does make sense. I want to switch back though, because you mentioned there Leonard Stringfield earlier, and obviously, you know, his work on crash retrievals was incredible. You know, if we're to believe that a lot of that is true, then there is a massive backlog and history of these craft, you know, in our possession. To what extent do you think these aerospace companies have made any headway in figuring them out?
Given what we saw on Ross Coulthart's Arizona series, they're now building craft.
To the full capability?
Seems like it's pretty close to the full capability, but we don't have enough information to decide yet. But I don't believe Ben Rich would come out and say we have the wherewithal to fly ET home without there being any truth to it, unless he was there trying to throw a smoke screen.
But this is the thing, I have these back and forths with myself all the time, because historically we've heard that they cracked anti-gravity, in the 50s or whatever. And then I also hear these things where they get the technology out of the hangar, they work on it, they can't figure it out, they put it back for another decade, get it back out, and rinse and repeat the same thing, where they just can't make any headway with it. I remember, I think it was Lakatsky saying that they managed to get inside one of these craft. That's a far cry from getting inside it, understanding how it works, and recreating it. So I don't know which way to.
Let me tell you what I do know. Lakatsky had not worked in the government for 10 years when he made that statement.
Ah, okay.
He retired.
That's fair. Yeah.
So he'd been out for several years, and he is still. But he's yet another one. You see what it's like to have to obey these non-disclosure agreements you've signed. He won't talk about anything that they have not given him dots or approval to talk about.
Someone needs to subpoena him.
Well, he would still have his oaths that he would have to live up to. I will not talk to you outside of a skiff that's certified to hear what I want to tell. He's got a block. There's nothing they can do to compel him to violate the law.
I mean, that's the roadblock that we're going to keep hitting now as things look to me. And that's what we talked about that earlier with the House not being able to do much with this information, or to even get some of this information.
Yeah, I just think we got to independently gather information, independently show we're seeing stuff that's anomalous, independently gather better and better evidence until this is so huge the dam cracks wide open. In other words, we want to try from the top. We also need to try from the bottom. Hopefully, because it'll be a lot easier to meet in the middle than it will beat it all the way down from one end.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it seems like organizations such as Arrow are pretty much defunct these days, so we're not going to get anything from them. Nothing.
They're useless. They're a waste of money.
I mean, academia as well. How do we get academia more involved? These are the things that
was actually an interesting part of the hearing we had. Is the woman that was there? She was a former National Science Foundation leader and disperser of funds, and then she's been on Matt's The Good Trouble Show being interviewed, and she is testimonial to the fact that the internal resistance to doing university research is crumbling. That to me says it's crumbling. Now, look, we still have to have Congress allow the National Science Foundation to use some of its money to fund research into these craft or these entities or whatever. In other words, we need legislative cover that enables the research to be done, and then you will have full professors and sit down assistant professors and graduate students all doing this work much cheaper than government could ever hope to do it.
The thing is that we've struggled getting any reasonable legislative language passed in the last few years. Do you think that we could still push for that?
Yes, but look, they tried to go all the way over the top all at once. They shot their cannon and the ball bounced off the wall. It made a little dent, but it didn't crack the dam.
So more like incremental over years rather than all at once would be better.
We don't have a choice. We need to make constant incremental progress. And if we all of a sudden put all our eggs in the government will tell us basket, that's how they trap us. There's a trap. We need to avoid the trap. Skywatcher was my first view at something that looks like it has the potential to avoid the trap.
Indeed. I mean, Jake Barber's very confident. We've heard him make some pretty bold statements about, 12 months, we're going to be able to do this, this, and this. I mean,
I think that that's going to run into harsh realities, but it won't be forever. I think 12 months is ambitious. I don't think they can do it, but that's me not being on the inside. I've not seen all of the inside yet. So I'm sure they will run into multiple roadblocks. Everything from funding to where they can collect data to how do they get scientists and engineers and others to help them. Well, I can just tell you, scientists want to support their research activities and their students. They can't do it without funding. It's just the way it is. It's just the nature of the beast. This costs money. We have to figure out where that's going to come from.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Because there are concerns that I've seen. I mean, I see it on X that, we don't know who funds them. There's all this worry about big tech getting involved in UAP, and kind of people seem to have a problem with that, and Silicon Valley and the tech bros.
I think it's naive. It's utterly naive to expect big tech not to get involved. It's utterly naive to expect anything except we need an all hands on deck approach to this.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. I think given that there's some transparency, though, to some degree, because if this all just gets hidden back, but this time with the tech industry, then what's it all for, So I think there needs to be public engagement.
I think we've got all sorts of stuff that is distracting us. All the craziness in the world is distracting us from following this thing we want to follow.
Sure.
But we need to care about the world at the same time we're following our nose. It's a tough time to see our way through because there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smoke out there covering up any progress.
It really is. And it's understandable. The world has to go on with all the problems that it has. We can't just put them to one side or expect them to stop for the sake of disclosure. So I understand that. And I do see a lot of frustration online. What advice would you give to people then who are like,
do whatever you can do personally to help. Whatever action you can personally help with, do it. Sitting here in front of this computer won't get stuff done unless you're writing a computer program or something like it. You can be an author, you can be a researcher, but you got to do something to contribute.
That I agree with wholeheartedly.
I made a mistake. The fighter F-16 that collided with the UFO was an Air Force F-16.
Okay, so it wasn't Navy.
No, I had a list here and I did look at it and made a boo-boo.
No problem at all. Anything else on your list that you think we should touch upon before we finish?
Not that I can see on my list. I just want people to pay attention. People ask me a lot of questions, and I do try to answer them, but they need to also understand that they want to listen to people that, like me, say, I don't know if I don't know.
No, I appreciate that. I really do. I'd rather hear that than someone who says that, I know this for a fact.
I would pay attention to Rolf Coulthard and his stuff. I'd pay attention to Skywatcher. I'd pay attention to others who are doing actual research work.
Yeah.
And I would even pay attention to Avi Loeb because his observatories are going to be highly credible and valuable. Other than the problem is they're so expensive. I don't know how they'll be widely deployed. But let me explain to you. An astronomer like Avi should already know that the valuable high-end telescopes can't do all the work. 90% of the grunt work done in astronomy now is done by amateur astronomers with their personal telescopes. There's a story there. Each of us can make a contribution, figure out what it is, and do it.
I like that. That's a great place to end, Bob. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to see what comes with your work with Skywatch. I know that you'll be very open with it. You're very active on social media. So yeah, really appreciate it and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vinny. It's always a pleasure to be on with you. As was on your show that I first outed my events on board the naval vessels, and it's always been an honor to be on with you.
Thank you so much.